Okay, so 4.4, day 2. This is going to be a no calculator section. And we are going to learn about a new way to divide called synthetic division. And it is an alternate method to divide a polynomial. And then you should have read that it's the alternate method used to divide a polynomial by a binomial of degree 1. So synthetic division can only be used if the degree is 1, which means you are going to have a linear binomial. So if you have something that is not a linear binomial, you would have to use long division. And this book doesn't have a ton of those, doesn't have those in here, but it is something that you will do in pre-calc, like you'll divide by quadratics. Okay, so we're going to highlight the important pieces of step 1. In step 1, you have to just make sure that your polynomial is in standard form. They are going to be given to you in that form most of the time. And then we have to write the coefficients of the dividend. Write the coefficients of the dividend. Okay? If the dividend is missing a term, you have to use 0 as the placeholder, which is something that we saw yesterday. And we talked about how in some cases it's really helpful, in other cases it's not. For this one, you have to use 0 as your placeholder. Okay, so you have to use that for a missing term. And then we also are going to be writing a constant of the divisor. It says in the box. So I'm going to show you the setup and then you'll see what that looks like. So whenever you have a divisor, your form is going to be x minus a. That's the form because it's a linear binomial. So in order to find what number you're going to put in the box, you're going to set your divisor equal to 0, and you're going to solve for x. So if you have x minus a equals 0, if you were to solve that for x, what would you do to both sides? If you had x minus a equals 0, what would we have to do both sides to get x by itself? Add a. Okay, so whatever your a value is, that's what you're going to end up putting in a box, which is part of the form of synthetic division. So what we're going to do is we're going to do step 1 with part A. Like I said, at first, there are a lot of rules, so it can be overwhelming. So what we're going to make is we're going to make this half of a rectangle here. Okay, so we're going to make this half of a rectangle. Whatever you have for your divisor, which is x minus 2, we're going to set that equal to 0, and we're going to solve. So if you add 2 to both sides, you get 2. That goes in a box right here on the end. Okay, and then from there, let's reference what we just read about. We're going to write the coefficients of the dividend. So remember, this is your dividend. Okay, so make sure it is in standard form. It is. So your leading coefficient is 3. Okay, so you're going to put your coefficient of x squared here. Then after x squared, you're going to put your coefficient of x, which is negative 8. And then in the last space, you're going to put your constant term, which is 4. Okay, and you can give yourself some room. You do want to make sure you keep them in columns. That's going to be a little bit easier. Okay, and then we already did the divisor. We already found what we're putting in the box. So then the last step of step 1 says bring the first coefficient down. Bring the first coefficient down. Okay, so we're going to bring down the 3. And this is where the fun happens. So now, It says to multiply the number just written in the bottom row by your A value, write the product under the next coefficient. So all we're going to do is we're going to multiply 3 times 2. So 3 times 2 is 6, and that's just going to go in this column. Okay, so if you drop the first number down, you're going to multiply. And then if you look at step 3, it says we're going to do what to those two numbers? We're going to add those two numbers together. Okay, so step 3, add the product and the coefficient above it. Okay, so if I add negative 8 plus 6, what do I get? Negative 2, and then I get to do the process again. So now we're going to do negative 2 times 2. Negative 2 times 2 is negative 4, and then you're going to add those straight down. Now, because this is the very last part, we always circle that. That is your remainder. So my remainder here is 0. Okay, now we're going to go up from the remainder. So before the remainder is the constant term, and before our constant is our x term. Okay, so when you write out your answer is 3x minus 2. So this is your coefficient of x, this is your constant, and there's no remainder, so I don't have to worry about writing that out. All right, so we're going to try it again because we want to make sure we have more practice. Also remember that when you have something to the negative 1, that just means division. It's because you're multiplying. If you have negative 1, do you guys remember yesterday? You don't have to write this down, but remember how I showed you it was 1 over x plus 2 to the first? So if you're multiplying a fraction by a whole number, what part gets multiplied? When you're multiplying a whole number and a fraction, what do you multiply together? A whole number times a fraction. What do you multiply? The numerator. Okay, so the numerator multiplied by the numerator is going to be that polynomial. So this is just another way to write your division. Okay, so you have your divisor. Your first step is always just going to be to set that equal to 0 and solve. Okay, so then your negative 2 is going to go here. So again, make sure it's in standard form. The first thing is the coefficient of x to the 4th, which we know is 3. Okay, after x to the 4th should be the coefficient of x cubed, then the coefficient of x squared, then the coefficient of x, and then your constant. And then sometimes instead of writing out constant, I'll just write like it's your number term. Okay, so for x cubed, what number's in front of x cubed? Negative 1, yep. And then what about x squared? Yeah, there's no x squared, so you have to make 0 your placeholder here. Okay, so since that's missing, you need a placeholder for x squared. Okay, so anytime there's something missing, even if it's a constant term, you do have to use 0 as a placeholder. If there's a gap in between those terms, you do have a coefficient of x, you do have a constant, so you're good. And then your first step is always to drop that down. Okay, so then remember, we're just multiplying. 3 times negative 2 is negative 6, then we add straight down. Okay, so I'm going to give you a moment to finish that. So multiply across, add straight down. All right, so we're gonna check this. So negative 7 times negative 2. How'd we do? Okay, so you multiply across, right? A negative times a negative is a positive. 14 times negative 2, negative 28. Negative 28 plus 5, negative 23. Negative 23 times negative 2 is 46. 46 minus 1 is 45. Okay, so now when you write your solution, this is your remainder, this is your number, this is your x squared, and then your x cubed. Okay, so just like we did yesterday, whenever you have a remainder, you're going to write that over what? Yep, so it's 45 over, and your divisor is the x plus 2. So remainder is going to go over your divisor. And then once you got that down, you can go to the back. All right, so you can only use synthetic division if you have the divisor in the form x minus a, okay? So it has to be in this form, okay? And then this is a linear binomial. And you also have to have a leading coefficient of 1. Okay, so you have a linear binomial with a leading coefficient of 1. Okay, if you have a leading coefficient other than 1, you must divide the numerator and the denominator by the leading coefficient. Okay, so once you have that down, I want you to look at the first one, and you need to figure out what you're going to divide by. All right, so you are only looking at the linear binomial. So if you have something that's other than 1 here, that's what you need to divide by, and it's all about your divisor. So this is your divisor. The leading coefficient is not 1. So whatever it is, you have to divide everything by that value. So we're going to divide everything in the numerator by 2 and everything in the denominator by 2. If you get something that is a decimal, you're going to leave it as a fraction. Okay, and then when you divide by 2, we're going to just rewrite it here. When you divide it by 2, you don't necessarily have to rewrite it. You can go directly to your synthetic division. So 4 divided by 2 is 2. You keep the x to the 4th. 37 is odd, so we're going to keep it as negative 37 over 2, x squared. 4 divided by 2 is 2x. 9 divided by 2 is a decimal, so we're going to keep it as a fraction. And then we're going to divide everything on the bottom by 2. Okay, now once you have that, you're still going to set your divisor equal to 0, and you're going to solve. So your x value is going to be 1/2. Okay, and then give yourself some space with this one because you have some more terms. You have x to the 4th, x to the 3rd, x squared, x, and then your number. Okay, so can you guys write your coefficients up there? Okay, so your coefficient should be from this polynomial. So your first coefficient now is 2. So now that we divided, we have this in a linear binomial with a coefficient of 1. That's why we're able to use this. And then what am I going to have to put for my x squared? 0. Okay, that is one reason I like to line those up so I don't forget it. You don't have to keep doing this every time, so when you're doing your homework, you don't. Thank you. There are no mistakes, just happy little accidents here. Okay, so then this is going to be 0. Yes. I think my face did. What? Okay, so yeah, so for your x cubed, there's no x cubed, so now we have our x squared. And then your first step is always to drop the first one down. Now drop that down. Now remember when you are multiplying by a half, you're just cutting this number in half. So half of 2 is 1, and then you add straight down. Okay, half of 1 is 1/2, and then see how these are already, you have a common denominator? So this would be negative 36 over 2, and what does that reduce to? Negative 18, yep. So now we're doing negative 18 times a half. Negative 9. Add straight down. Negative 7. And then again, you already have your common denominator here, so 2 over 2 reduces to 1. Now this is your remainder, so I always just do remainder number x, x squared, x cubed. So you have 2x cubed plus x squared minus 18x minus 7, and then the remainder is going to live over the divisor. Now, there is a better way to write this, and your book shows it to you. I'm going to show you how to do it. I am going to accept either answer though. So a lot of times when you are writing out factors, they want integer coefficients, and 1/2 is not an integer. So there is a way for you to simplify the remainder. Okay, and like I said, your book shows you this too. If you want to simplify the remainder, all you have to do is multiply by what you divided by earlier. So remember how we divided by 2? All we have to do now is multiply the top and the bottom by 2. Because if you multiply by 2 over 2, you're just multiplying this value by what? 1. Yep, because 1 times anything is itself. So if we multiply straight across, you'll have 2 on the top. And then if we distribute, 2 times x is 2x. 2 times negative 1/2 is negative 1. Yep. So now we have integer coefficients. 2 is an integer and -1 is an integer. So like if you are checking in the back for your answers and you see like they did not write it like this, it's 2 over 2x minus 1, it's because they simplified. Okay, and then like I said, I'll take any answer. Okay, so either one of those are going to be fine. All right, so for part D, I want to see if you guys can do the first step. I want to see if you can do all the steps. So let's just start with the first and make sure we're on the same page. All right, so we are dividing both of these by 4. So when you divide everything by 4, you should have x to the 4th plus 3/4 x cubed minus 3x squared minus 1/4 x. And then 6 over 4, 2 goes into both, so let's leave it as 3 over 2. Now, the reason why you're dividing by 4 is because you always divide by what is in front of your divisor if it's not 1. So that's why you're dividing everything by 4. So now this becomes x plus 3/4. So now your divisor is a linear binomial with a leading coefficient of 1. So it has to be a linear binomial with a leading coefficient of 1. Okay? So if you have x plus 3/4, we know that's going to be the opposite when we solve. Okay, so we're going to start with x to the 4th. Then we want our x cubed, x squared, x, our constant term. Okay, so x cubed is 3/4. Do we have an x squared? Yes. Do we have an x? Yes. Do we have a constant? Yes. Okay, now you are going to have some fractions. Okay, when you're doing this, remember you are multiplying a whole number by a fraction. So earlier I asked you, oh, what do you multiply the whole number by what part of the fraction? Hilaria helped me out and said the numerator, right? Okay, so when you multiply by 1, you'll get -3/4. This is already working out pretty nice for us because you'll get 0 when you subtract. Anything times 0 is 0. When we add straight down, we get -3. Okay, again, remember, you multiply the whole number by the top of the fraction. Okay, and then you'll have 9 minus 1 is 8/4. 8/4 reduces to 2. And so you can just write the 2 down when you're doing that. I'm just putting this so you understand where we're getting it. And then again, you're going to multiply only by the top. Okay, so 2 times -3 is -6/4. And -6/4 reduces to -3 over 2. So when you add, you get 0. So your remainder is 0. This is your constant coefficient of x. There's no coefficient for x squared. So when you're writing your answer, you do not have to write 0x squared. Okay, it's proper not to write it. So you have 1x cubed minus 3x plus 2. Okay, and then that is your final answer. All right, so you're going to work on your homework today, and while you're doing that, I'm going to try to get some tests graded. So I need you guys working independently today. If you want to listen to your own music, you can. I can put on some instrumental for studying.